It begins with a sound. A low, rhythmic chanting rising from the streets of Tehran, growing louder with each block, swelling into something vast and unstoppable. Thousands of voices join together in fury, their breath visible in the cool November air. The date is the 4th of November 1979. The place is the compound of the United States Embassy, a walled fortress in the heart of the Iranian capital. The students move quickly. They are young, their faces set with purpose, carrying ropes and iron cutters, and a certainty that history is on their side. They scale the outer walls, drop into the compound, and within minutes the most powerful nation on earth watches helplessly as its diplomatic mission is overrun. The Marine Guards stand down. Classified documents are fed into shredding machines and burning barrels. Diplomats are blindfolded with their own neckties and marched out at gunpoint before a roaring crowd. Inside the Chancery building, the air smells of scorched paper. The American flag comes down. The Ayatollah's portrait goes up. Somewhere in the White House Situation Room, an aide lifts a telephone and speaks words that no administration ever wants to hear. 52 Americans will be held captive for the next 444 days. The images of blindfolded hostages broadcast into American living rooms every night will burn themselves into the national consciousness for a generation. But to understand how this happened, you cannot begin in 1979. You must go further back. You must go to a summer night in 1953, to a coup organized in the shadows, and to the moment when the United States made a decision that would echo through every subsequent decade of its relationship with Iran. Because the rage that filled those embassy courtyards in 1979 was not born overnight. It had been building for 26 years, fed by grievance and humiliation and broken trust. This is the story of how two nations, once allies, once partners in a shared vision for the Middle East, became bitter and enduring enemies. To understand the depth of what was lost, you must first understand what was built. In the years following World War II, Iran occupied a position of extraordinary strategic importance. It shared a long border with the Soviet Union. Beneath its soil lay some of the largest oil reserves on the planet, and it was governed, by the early 1950s, by a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mosaddegh, a nationalist, a lawyer, and a man who believed, with total conviction, that Iranian oil belonged to the Iranian people. In 1951, Mosaddegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The British, who had grown rich on Iranian petroleum for decades, were furious. They imposed an international embargo and appealed to Washington for help. The Eisenhower administration, newly in office and consumed by Cold War anxieties, saw the situation through a single lens. Could Mossadegh's weakness open Iran to Soviet influence? The answer they gave themselves was yes. The response they chose was covert action. In August of 1953, the CIA and British intelligence executed Operation Ajax, a coordinated campaign of bribery, propaganda, and organized street violence designed to bring down an elected government. Paid agents posed as Mossadegh supporters and attacked religious figures to discredit him. Mobs were hired to riot. Military officers were bought. Within days, Mossadegh was under arrest. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had briefly fled the country in a panic, was returned to his throne on an American-backed tide. Washington celebrated quietly. The Shah was their man, pro-Western, anti-communist, and deeply grateful. Over the following decades, American military hardware poured into Iran. U.S. advisors trained the Iranian army. The CIA helped construct SAVAK, the Shah's feared secret police, which would become notorious across the region for its surveillance, its torture chambers, and its ruthless suppression of any political opposition. Iran became, in the language of Cold War strategists, a pillar of stability. It was a reliable partner, a regional gendarme, a buffer against Soviet expansion. The relationship had the appearance of genuine warmth. The Shah visited Washington. American presidents visited Tehran. Nixon and Kissinger embraced him as a partner in their vision of regional order. The oil revenues of the 1970s, amplified by OPEC price increases, funded a frantic modernization program, highways, universities, military bases, a nuclear program. Tehran's northern suburbs grew prosperous and western-looking, full of boutiques and cinemas, and the trappings of a society in rapid transformation. But beneath the surface, the foundations were cracking. The Shah's modernization was top-down, imposed, and deeply unequal. The rural poor saw little of the oil wealth. The religious establishment, the clerics who had guided Iranian society for centuries, watched as their authority was systematically diminished. SAVAK made political opposition impossible, which meant that the only space left for dissent was the mosque. And in the mosques, a different kind of politics was being preached, one rooted in Islam, in anti-imperialism, and in a burning hatred for the foreign influence that the Shah represented. The name that kept surfacing in SAVAK reports, in intercepted communications, in the whispered conversations of bazaar merchants and seminary students, was that of an exiled cleric living in Iraq, and later in France. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini. He had been forced out of Iran in 1964 for his vocal opposition to the Shah. From exile, he continued to speak, his voice recorded on cassette tapes that were smuggled across the border and copied by hand, passed from household to household, played in the back rooms of mosques and the private kitchens of ordinary families. He did not speak the language of Marxism or liberalism. He spoke the language of faith, of justice, and of sacred resistance against a corrupt and foreign-backed tyrant. The Americans, comfortable in their Cold War framework, largely failed to understand what they were looking at. They saw a stable Shah. They saw a modernizing economy. They did not adequately see the society boiling beneath. By 1978, the Shah's grip was visibly loosening. Protests had become a weekly occurrence in Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, and Qom. The crowds were enormous, drawn from every corner of Iranian society, leftists, liberals, religious conservatives, and the urban poor, united by a single demand: the removal of the Shah. His security forces shocked protesters. The protests grew larger. It was a cycle the regime could not break. Jimmy Carter, sitting in the White House, received confused and contradictory intelligence. Some advisors told him the Shah could hold on. Others warned of collapse. Carter had made human rights a centerpiece of his foreign policy, which created an uncomfortable tension. The Shah's regime was committing systematic abuses, and yet the Shah was one of America's most important allies. The administration hedged. It encouraged the Shah to liberalize, then backed away from the pressure. It sent private signals of support, then public messages of concern. The Shah, reading these contradictory signals, grew uncertain and indecisive. He had always drawn his confidence from American backing. Now that backing seemed to flicker. In January 1979, the Shah left Iran. He told his people he was going on holiday. He never came back. Khomeini, after 15 years of exile, boarded a plane in Paris and landed in Tehran to a reception that defied description. Millions flooded the streets. People wept. People prostrated themselves on the tarmac. One observer wrote that it felt less like the arrival of a politician and more like the return of a prophet. Iran had chosen its revolution. The Islamic Republic that Khomeini built was unlike anything the political scientists in Washington had prepared for. It was not communist. It was not a conventional dictatorship. It was a theocracy organized around the concept of velayat-e-faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, a system in which ultimate political authority was vested not in the people alone, but in a supreme religious leader who interpreted divine law. America's entire Cold War framework simply had no category for it. In October 1979, Carter made a decision that would trigger the final rupture. The deposed Shah, dying of cancer and in need of medical treatment unavailable in Mexico where he had been staying, was admitted to a New York hospital at the urging of powerful friends including Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller. In Tehran, the reaction was volcanic. To many Iranians, the move looked like America harboring a war criminal, preparing perhaps another 1,953-star restoration. 5 days later, the students scaled the embassy walls. The hostage crisis had begun. Khomeini, calculating quickly, embraced the seizure. It served his purposes. It radicalized the revolution, sidelined his more moderate opponents, and gave him a permanent rallying point. America, the great Satan, had been humiliated on the world stage. The hostages became both leverage and symbol. Carter's presidency was consumed by the crisis. A rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw, ended in catastrophe in the Iranian desert when helicopters malfunctioned and aircraft collided, killing 8 American servicemen. The burning wreckage was photographed and broadcast globally. Carter appeared helpless. The hostages were released on the very day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, the 20th of January 1981, in what many interpreted as a final, deliberate humiliation of the outgoing president. The timing was calculated. The message was unmistakable. The hostage release did not mark the beginning of reconciliation. It marked the beginning of a longer, colder, and more dangerous rivalry. Within months of the hostages' return home, Iraq invaded Iran. The war that followed was one of the most devastating conflicts of the 20th century's second half. 8 years of trench warfare, chemical weapons, mass conscription, and mutual exhaustion that killed somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. Washington's position was revealing. The Reagan administration, determined to prevent an Iranian victory, tilted decisively toward Iraq and its dictator, Saddam Hussein. American intelligence was shared with Baghdad. Satellite imagery of Iranian troop positions flowed to Iraqi commanders. Diplomatic cover was provided when the international community documented Iraqi chemical weapons attacks against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. Donald Rumsfeld, later to become George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense, flew to Baghdad in December 1983 and shook Saddam Hussein's hand. In Tehran, the meaning of all this was perfectly clear. America had helped overthrow their elected government in 1953. America had built SAVAK. America had sheltered the Shah. And now America was actively helping an enemy who was gassing Iranian soldiers in the marshlands along the Shatt al-Arab. Each of these facts was catalogued, remembered, and added to the ledger of grievances that shaped Iranian strategic thinking. The Reagan years also produced one of the strangest episodes in the entire history of U.S.-Iran relations. While publicly supporting Iraq, members of the Reagan administration were secretly selling arms to Iran, in violation of an arms embargo, using the proceeds to covertly fund anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua. The Iran-Contra affair, when it became public in 1986, was politically explosive in America. In Iran, it confirmed a long-standing belief that American policy was cynical, manipulative, and fundamentally untrustworthy. Even its gestures of engagement were hidden agendas. The 1990s brought no fundamental shift. Iran supported Hezbollah in Lebanon, the organization that had carried out the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American servicemen in a single blast. Iran provided weapons and training to militant groups across the region. America maintained its sanctions and its hostility. The two countries spoke to each other almost exclusively through proxies, through intermediaries, through acts of violence and retaliation that neither side formally acknowledged. Then came the 11th of September 2001. In Tehran, the reaction was genuinely complex. Ordinary Iranians held candlelit vigils for the American dead. President Mohammad Khatami, a reformist who had been pushing for dialogue with the West, offered condolences. Iran had no love for Al-Qaeda, a Sunni extremist organization that regarded Shia Islam as heresy, and Iranian intelligence even provided some cooperation to American forces in the initial phase of the Afghanistan campaign next door. It appeared, briefly, that the chasm might be bridged. Then came the State of the Union address of January 2002. George W. Bush named Iran as part of an axis of evil, alongside Iraq and North Korea. In Tehran, the moderate faction that had argued for engagement with America was devastated. It had extended a hand. It had received a declaration of enmity. The lesson drawn, particularly by the hardliners who had always opposed dialogue, was simple and enduring. America could not be trusted, and engagement was weakness. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 then produced one of history's great ironies. The United States destroyed the Sunni Arab regime that had been Iran's primary strategic threat. It removed the government that had fought Iran for 8 years, killed hundreds of thousands of Iranian soldiers, and used chemical weapons against Iranian civilians. The power vacuum that followed was filled, in significant part, by Iranian-backed Shia militias and political parties. America had, at enormous cost, handed Iran a strategic windfall. By the mid-2000s, the world's attention turned to Iran's nuclear program. The Islamic Republic had been pursuing uranium enrichment in facilities that it had initially concealed from international inspectors. The stated purpose was civilian energy generation. American and Israeli officials suspected something far more dangerous. The confrontation over Iran's nuclear ambitions would define the next 2 decades of the relationship. Sanctions accumulated. Year by year, the noose tightened around the Iranian economy. Oil exports were restricted. Banks were cut off from the international financial system. The rial collapsed. Inflation surged. Ordinary Iranian families who had nothing to do with the decisions of their government paid the price in the form of medicine shortages, rising food costs, and a grinding economic depression that ground down the quality of daily life. Covert operations accompanied the economic pressure. Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in the streets of Tehran, shot by motorcyclists who attached magnetic bombs to their vehicles, in operations widely attributed to Israeli intelligence with American awareness. A sophisticated computer virus known as Stuxnet, later acknowledged to be a joint American-Israeli creation, was used to physically destroy centrifuges at the Natanz enrichment facility by causing them to spin out of control while their operators watched helpless, their instruments showing normal readings. The Obama administration concluded that military strikes or sabotage could delay but not permanently prevent Iranian nuclear capability, and that a negotiated solution was the only path to durable restraint. The result, after years of patient and technically complex diplomacy, was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, signed in 2015. Iran agreed to dramatic reductions in its enriched uranium stockpile, intrusive inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and limits on its centrifuge program. In return, nuclear-related sanctions were lifted. For a brief moment, the possibility of a managed relationship seemed real. It did not last. Donald Trump, entering the White House in 2017, viewed the nuclear deal as a catastrophic concession. In May 2018, he withdrew the United States from the agreement and reimposed sweeping sanctions. The European signatories to the deal, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, tried to keep the agreement alive, but without American participation, the economic incentives for Iran evaporated. Iran began rolling back its own commitments, increasing enrichment levels, and reducing inspector access. The architecture that had taken years to construct was dismantled in months. The confrontation reached its most acute point in the early hours of the 3rd of January 2020. A U.S. drone strike near Baghdad International Airport killed Major General Qassem Soleimani, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds force and the single most powerful military figure in Iran after the supreme leader. Soleimani had spent decades building the network of proxy militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Afghanistan that gave Iran its regional reach and its ability to project force without direct confrontation. He was, to many in the Iranian military establishment, a living symbol of the revolution's survival and strategic vision. He was also, in the assessment of the Trump administration, directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers through IED attacks in Iraq, and was planning further attacks. Iran's retaliation, ballistic missile strikes against American bases in Iraq, was calibrated and forewarned in ways that minimized casualties. It was enough to demonstrate capability without triggering full-scale war. But the assassination of Soleimani hardened Iranian opinion in ways that may persist for decades. His funeral drew enormous crowds. His image appeared on murals across Tehran. And the message delivered to every Iranian leader who might have contemplated compromise with America was unambiguous. Engagement produces assassinations. The years since have seen no fundamental resolution. Nuclear talks have continued in stuttering cycles, making progress, stalling, coming close to agreement, falling apart. Iranian-backed militia groups continue to strike American targets in the region. America continues to enforce sanctions. Israeli and Iranian forces engage in a shadow war across the Middle East, striking each other's ships, infrastructure, and proxies, while both governments deny direct involvement. Step back from the specific events: the coup, the revolution, the hostages, the war, the sanctions, the assassinations, and what you see is something more fundamental. You see two societies that have spent 70 years teaching themselves to see the worst in each other and finding, at almost every turn, evidence to confirm what they already believed. Iranians look at America and they see 1953. They see a democracy overthrown by foreign intelligence officers because it dared to control its own resources. They see a brutal secret police built with American assistance. They see a war in which their sons were gassed while Washington held Saddam Hussein's hand. They see sanctions that cut off medicine to Iranian children. These events are not abstract to Iranians. They are part of the lived experience of multiple generations, taught in schools, commemorated in public, present in political discourse every day. Americans look at Iran and they see the hostages. They see 52 citizens paraded blindfolded before cameras for 444 days. They see the ruins of the Beirut barracks. They see decades of proxy attacks that killed American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. They see a government that has repeatedly called for the destruction of American allies, funded terrorist organizations, and pursued nuclear weapons while denying doing so. These events, too, are real. The anger they produced is legitimate. What neither side has fully reckoned with is the way in which each of its own decisions made the other side's worst behavior more likely. The coup produced the revolution. The revolution produced the hostage crisis. The hostage crisis produced the tilt towards Saddam. The support for Saddam produced a generation of Iranian leaders who regarded American betrayal as a fundamental constant of geopolitics. And so it continued, each action feeding the next, mistrust compounding on itself like interest on a debt that no one wanted to inherit, but everyone was forced to pay. The leaders who shaped this rivalry were not, for the most part, monsters or fools. Eisenhower and Dulles were men who genuinely feared Soviet expansion and acted on that fear. The Shah was a modernizer who became a tyrant. Khomeini was a man of real theological conviction whose revolution consumed its own children. Carter was a president who wanted to do right and found that doing right in foreign policy is rarely simple. Reagan was a strategist who made cynical choices with long-lasting consequences. All of them were also prisoners of their own historical moment, their own information, their own fears. And yet the consequences of their choices outlived them all. The rivalry they built, through coup and revolution, through war and sanctions, through assassination and retaliation, became self-perpetuating. It created constituencies on both sides who needed the enemy to exist. Hardliners in Tehran whose political legitimacy rested on resistance to the Great Satan, and American factions whose strategic worldview required an implacably hostile Iran. The ancient Persian city of Persepolis was built by Darius and Xerxes as a monument to empire, to grandeur, to ambition, to the conviction that great powers shaped the world by their will. The stones of Persepolis still stand in the Iranian desert, stripped of their original meaning by 25 centuries of changing dynasties. They are a reminder of something every empire eventually learns, that the decisions made in moments of supreme confidence have consequences that echo far longer than the confidence lasts. Two nations, once partners in an uncertain world, now locked in a rivalry neither fully chose and neither fully knows how to end. The enmity between Iran and America was not written in geography or religion or civilization. It was written, decision by decision, in the offices of intelligence agencies and the chambers of revolutionary councils, in the blood of soldiers and the silence of blindfolded diplomats. It was built by human beings making choices. And what human beings have built, human beings, given sufficient will, memory, and honesty, have occasionally managed to dismantle. Whether that day is coming, no one can say. If this history resonated with you, like the video, subscribe, and share it with others.